0947 hours. A farm track junction above the Our Valley, eastern Belgium. 17 December 1944. The snow was moving, not wind, not drift. Moving the way a field moves when men are crawling across it on their elbows, 300 meters out, in white daubed shelter halves, and they think you cannot see them. Private First Class Amos Leoo could not see them. He did not need to. He was lying on his stomach behind a Browning machine gun that should not have existed. The Army had a name for what he had built. The name was unauthorized modification of a crew-served weapon. 2 days earlier, a lieutenant had stood over him in the mud at Schönberg and told him to break it down and put it back the way the manual said. Leoo had said, "Yes, sir." Leoo had lied. The gun sat 7 inches off the ground. 7, not 14, the way the M2 tripod holds it. 7, the height of a man's forearm, the height of a soldier's helmet when he is crawling and praying and certain he is invisible. Rounds from a normal machine gun pass over a crawling man. Rounds from this one did not. His right hand came off the grip. 2 fingers went into the breast pocket of his field jacket and found the flat, cold length of steel he kept there, and his thumb ran once down the dull edge of it, the way a man tests a blade he already knows is sharp. Then his hand came back to the grip. He did not look through a sight. There was nothing to look at. The field was one white sheet under a white sky, and the tree line was a smear of charcoal. Instead, he reached left, to a mechanism bolted to a plank of Belgian farm sledge, and he turned a small knurled wheel 11 clicks. 11 clicks. Because at 05:30 that morning, in the dark, he had walked out into that field alone and planted 4 stakes in the snow, and he had written the numbers on the back of his hand in pencil. He was an artilleryman. Nobody had told him he was allowed to do this either. He pressed the trigger. The gun did not rise. That was the whole point. That was the thing they had banned. A Browning laid that low, on that mount, sends its cone of fire flat across the earth like water poured on a table, and it stays under a meter for 600 yards, and everything inside that distance, that is lower than a meter, is inside the gun. 42 men from the Fusilier Company of the 18th Volksgrenadier Division were inside that distance. 31 seconds later, most of them were not going home. There is a report in the U.S. Army records for this position on this morning. It lists the junction as held. It does not list who held it. It does not list a name. Remember that. We'll come back to it, and it's going to hurt. Because 7 hours earlier, a man he trusted had promised him a truck was coming back. If this one grabbed you, hit like and subscribe. These names only survive if we carry them. Pull back. You need to understand what was actually being asked of him, because the arithmetic is obscene. 0530 hours, 16 December 1944. The German barrage opened across the Ardennes front on a 90-mile line. 3 armies, 250,000 men. The Americans holding the Schnee-Eifel sector were a thin, tired screen, some of them in the line for the first time, some of them there to rest. Attached to that sector was the 333rd Field Artillery Battalion, 12 155mm howitzers, and roughly 500 black soldiers, commanded by white officers, in an army that had decided by regulation that men like them were suited to hauling shells and not much else. They were not infantry. They had no infantry training worth the name. They had carbines, a handful of Brownings for local defense, and a fire mission. By nightfall on the 16th, the Germans had gone around them. By the early hours of the 17th, the 333rd was ordered to displace west. They lost howitzers on the road. They lost trucks. Battery C came apart in pieces in the dark near Schönberg, and the pieces started walking. Now here is the tactical problem, and I want you to see it the way Leoo saw it. The only route west for the survivors ran through a single farm track junction between 2 low ridges. Open ground on both sides. Pasture, 400 meters of it, flat as a plate under fresh snow. Whoever held that junction controlled whether 100 and something exhausted men got out or got taken. The Germans knew it too. They sent scouts. That is what a Fusilier company does. It goes first, on its belly, quietly, and finds the seam. Here is what he had. 1 M1919A4 Browning, 20 caliber, air-cooled, belt-fed. 7 boxes of ammunition, 250 rounds each. 1 M1 carbine, with 4 magazines. No mortars. No radio that worked. No mines, no wire. Here is what they had. A reinforced reconnaissance element. 60-plus men, with MG-42s at a cyclic rate more than double his, 8-centimeter mortars ranging in behind them, and the patience of professionals who had done this in Russia. And here is the part that nobody explains properly in these stories. A machine gun on a standard M2 tripod sits with its bore roughly 14 inches above the ground. Fire it across 400 meters of flat pasture and the cone of fire climbs. It stays low, yes, but low means chest height at 300 meters, chest height on a standing man. The Germans were not standing. The Germans were crawling. In snow, behind white cloth, 12 inches off the earth. 14 inches of gun against 12 inches of enemy. Do that math. He was going to shoot over the top of them all day and lose the junction by dinner time, 0140 hours. He tried to explain this to First Lieutenant Raymond Vaught by the tailgate of a 2.5-ton truck with the engine running. Vaught did not want a lecture on grazing fire from a cannoneer. Vaught wanted the column moving. What Vaught said was that the gun would be emplaced per the manual, that the tripod was battalion property, and that if Ledoux had stripped the traversing and elevating mechanism off an M2, he was looking at Article of War 83, willful damage to military property. Then he said the other thing. The thing about staying in his lane, except that isn't the word he used, and the word he used had been following Ledoux since Louisiana. 2 men from Battery C heard it. Neither wrote it down. The runner is out of breath, and Sattler dislikes that. He takes the report standing, one glove off, steam rising from a canteen cup he has not touched. 2nd platoon has taken fire at the junction. 4 down. The runner says the Americans have a machine gun. Of course the Americans have a machine gun. Americans always have a machine gun. He asks how many casualties are hits to the legs. The runner says none. Sattler frowns at that for perhaps 2 seconds. It is a strange thing, and strange things are usually reporting errors, and then he lets it go. Push the flank, he says. It's a rear echelon unit. They'll run by noon. He drinks the coffee. It has gone cold. Back to the junction. By 0400 the column was gone. The last thing Ledoux was told was that a truck would come back for him. No truck came back. Like, share, subscribe. It costs you nothing, and it keeps this channel finding the forgotten ones. To understand the gun, you have to go to Plaquemine, Louisiana, and stand in a shed that smelled like burnt oil and river water. Amos Leoo was born there in 1921, the third of 5, in a house where the front room was a house and the back room was a business. His father, Theo Ledoux, was a blacksmith the way a man is a blacksmith when there is no such thing as one job. He shod what horses were left. He welded barge fittings. He rebuilt sugar mill gearing in August when the mills ran hot. And in the winter, he repaired shotguns for white farmers who would not shake his hand but trusted his work absolutely. That is where it started. Not with guns. With fits. A shotgun that would not extract. A mowing machine that threw its knife. A pump that lost prime. Theo Ledoux's gift was not strength. He was not a big man. It was that he could look at a machine and see the argument inside it. Every machine is 2 parts disagreeing. Find the disagreement, and the fix explains itself. He never said he was proud of the boy. He handed him a file. It was an 8-inch flat mill file, no handle, the tang wrapped in a strip of inner tube, because Theo hated the way a wooden handle went slick. It was already old. Its teeth were worn glassy on one face from a decade of drawing across mild steel. Amos was 9. His father put it in his right hand, closed the boy's fingers around the rubber, and said the only instruction he would ever give about it, "Don't press, let it cut." That file lived in Amos Ledoux's right hand for 11 years. It went with him to a machine shop in Baton Rouge at 16. It went into a duffel bag in 1942. It rode in the breast pocket of his field jacket across the Atlantic, into Normandy in the summer of 1944, up through France, and into the coldest December Belgium had seen in 30 years. He didn't pray with it. He didn't talk about it. But when a decision was sitting on his chest, his thumb would find the worn face and run down at once. Don't press, let it cut, and then he'd move. His father died in February 1943, of a heart that quit while he was standing at an anvil. The telegram reached Amos at Camp Gruber, Oklahoma. He was granted no leave. The battalion was in the middle of a firing schedule. That is the second thing you need to know about him. The first is the shed. The third is what the army was. Amos Leoo enlisted expecting to fight. What he got was a segregated field artillery battalion, white officers, and an institutional certainty that he was a pair of arms. He was, by the measurements the army used, brilliant. He could compute a deflection correction in his head faster than the men doing it on paper. He could hear a howitzer's recoil mechanism and tell you the oil was low. He made private first class in 26 months and stopped there. The first time it landed hard was Oklahoma, 1943. A gunnery instructor demonstrating the M12 panoramic telescope misstated a mill relationship. Leoo corrected him. Quietly, once, in front of 11 men. The instructor did not argue with the correction. He corrected the record on the board. Then he made Leoo stand at attention outside the shed for 4 hours in 94-degree heat, and every man who passed was told why, and the reason he gave was not, he was wrong. The reason he gave was a word. The same word. The one that means, you may be right, and it will not save you. Leoo stood the 4 hours. He did not sway, and somewhere in hour 3 he came to the conclusion that would eventually put 40 men in the snow outside a Belgian farm. They were never going to let him be right in public, so he was going to be right in private, and let the results argue. He started reading manuals nobody assigned him. FM 23-2055, the .30 caliber Browning, FM 2345. Ordnance parts catalogs he pulled out of trash barrels. He learned the M1919 family the way his father had learned shotguns, by taking apart the disagreements. He learned that the A6 variant had a bipod and a shoulder stock, and a flash hider, and a lighter barrel. He learned that the A4's heavy barrel could hold a sustained rate the A6's could not. He learned that the M2 tripod's traversing and elevating mechanism was, functionally, a miniature artillery laying device with a mill scale on it, a fact that struck him as almost funny, because everyone treated it like a clamp. And he learned the sentence that would define him, buried in a paragraph about grazing fire: the danger space is greatest when the gun is closest to the ground. He read that sentence and sat back and thought about his father's shed. Every machine is 2 parts disagreeing. The Browning wanted to be a mounted, crude, precision weapon. The battlefield wanted a weapon one exhausted man could drag through snow and lay in the dark. Nobody had made those 2 things agree. He started sketching in the back of a paybook in November 1944. By the time the Ardennes broke open, the sketch had become a thing wrapped in a shelter half in the back of a truck. Nobody had approved it. Nobody had seen it work. 1 second. If you're still here, hit subscribe. The next part is where it stops being a story and starts being a survival problem. 0412 hours, 17 December. Temperature at the junction, approximately -11 Celsius. Leoo had been awake for 46 hours. The last vehicle sound had died 20 minutes earlier. He had 2 men with him at that point, Corporal Willis Boyce and a 19-year-old ammunition handler named Errol Tate. Sergeant Cleophas Danridge was the one who left them there. Cleo Danridge, Battery C Section Chief, from Mobile, a man who had covered for Leoo twice, who had shared a shelter half with him in Normandy rain, who had once told a white sergeant that the reason Leoo talked back was that Leoo was usually right. Danridge was also the man who had reported the modified gun to Lieutenant Vaught. He did it to protect the battery. He said so, straight out, No excuses. They're looking for a reason, and you are handing them one. Ledoux understood the logic. Understanding it did not do anything about the way it sat in his chest. At 04:05, Danridge gripped his shoulder and said a truck would come back inside the hour. The hour passed. 05:12 hours, first attempt, and it failed. He emplaced the gun the way he was ordered to. Full M2 tripod, standard height, covering the track. A German patrol probed at 05:09. He fired 40 rounds into the pasture. He hit nothing. Not one man. The tracers went out flat and beautiful, and passed clean over the top of 8 crawling scouts who never even broke rhythm. Boyce, watching through binoculars, said one word: nothing. 14 inches, 12 inches. He had just watched the math kill him. 0640 hours. Mortar rounds. 8 centimeters, 3 of them, walking in on the muzzle flash. The third landed 11 meters left. Corporal Willis Boyce died at 0641 hours. Fragment through the neck. He was 24. Errol Tate started running west 4 minutes later. Ledoux did not stop him. Tate was 19, unarmed except for a carbine with 1 magazine, and there was no version of this where the boy's death added anything. Whether that counts as mercy or as a man deciding to be alone, decide for yourself. And now the gun. 0655 hours. Ledoux dragged the Browning back 40 meters into a drainage cut behind a stone field wall. Dead ground, no flash signature, and began building the thing they had ordered him to destroy. Understand what he was working with. Fingers already numb. No feeling in the last 2 joints of his left hand. Light from a shielded flashlight held in his teeth. 40 minutes, maybe, before the next probe. Component 1, the M1919A4. Receiver, heavy barrel, 3006, cyclic around 500 rounds per minute. He kept it for one reason, the heavy barrel. He was going to have to fire long belts without a barrel change, and the A6's lighter tube would have gone soft. Component 2, an M1919A6. He had scavenged the parts off a burned-out weapons carrier at Schönberg the previous evening. The bipod, the shoulder stock assembly, and the conical flash hider. The stock let him lock the gun into his shoulder while lying completely flat. The flash hider mattered more than any of it. At 7 inches off the snow, muzzle flash reflects. Without that cone, he would have painted his own position white every time he fired. Component 3. The M2 tripod's traversing and elevating mechanism. The part Vaught had threatened to charge him for. He unbolted it and mounted it to a plank cut from a Belgian farm sledge, 3 feet of ash runner, curved, meant for hauling beet pulp over frozen ground. The runner became the base. The sledge's curve became his mobility. He could drag the whole assembly on a rope without lifting it. Component 4, a Jeep's M31 pedestal pintle, cut off a wrecked quarter-ton in the ditch with a hacksaw blade and 40 minutes of his life. The pintle gave him a swivel that would take the recoil at that height without the whole assembly walking backward across the ice. Bore height, finished, 7 1/8 inches. He set headspace by hand, screw the barrel fully in, back it off 2 clicks, and he did it 3 times, because in that cold the numbers lie. He ran the gun almost dry, wiping the oil off the bolt with a rag, because at -11 the standard lubricant turns to jelly, and a jellied Browning fires 1 round and stops. He cut the cloth belts out of their boxes and relayed the rounds into metal links, because cloth belts absorb moisture and freeze into a solid brick. His hands cracked open across the knuckles. He worked with blood on the receiver. And at 0721 hours, with the file from his father's shed, he drew down the burr on the pintle collar where the hacksaw had left it rough. 1 stroke, 2, 4. No pressure at all. Don't press. Let it cut, until the swivel turned smooth and silent under his palm. Then he did the thing nobody else in that valley would have thought of. 0740 hours. He walked out into the open pasture, alone, in the dark. 400 meters of ground the Germans were already patrolling, and he planted aiming stakes. 4 of them, cut from fence pickets, at the culvert, at the fence corner, at the burned haystack, at the far gate, exactly the way an artillery battery lays in on a registration point. Then he crawled back, laid the gun on each stake in turn, and read the mill scale off the T&E mechanism. He wrote 4 numbers on the back of his left hand in pencil. He had just turned a machine gun into a battery. He could now fire, accurately, at ground he could not see. The second platoon report comes in at 11:05, and Sattler reads it twice. 11 dead. All 11 struck below the waist or through the upper back. Men who were crawling. Men who were doing everything correctly. He goes outside and looks east through his glasses at 400 meters of empty snow and 1 stone wall and nothing. No flash, no smoke, no gun. He has been shot at by machine guns since 1941. He knows what a machine gun looks like. There is no machine gun there. Where is it firing from? He asks Feldwebel Kroll. Kroll says it sounds like it is firing from inside the ground. Sattler does not answer that. He orders the 3rd platoon to hold and the mortars to search the wall. He notices, later, that he ordered them to search the wall from behind cover, and that he did not need to say that, and that he said it anyway. 0915 hours. First real success and first near catastrophe together. A 6-man probe came up the culvert line. He turned the wheel to the culvert number, no sighting, no ranging, and fired a 9-second burst. 6 men. 6. Nobody in that field ever stood up, because the gun was already under them. Then the gun stopped. Ruptured case in the chamber. He worked it out with the ruptured cartridge extractor. Hands shaking so hard he dropped the tool twice into the snow and had to find it by feel, while German voices carried across the pasture from 90 meters away. 11:02 hours. He took a round through the left forearm, through and through, entering the outside of the arm, exiting near the wrist, missing the radial artery by the width of a pencil, and taking a channel out of the muscle belly of the extensors. It did not kill him. It did something worse. It disabled his left hand's grip. He could no longer hold a belt taut, and a Browning that isn't fed with tension jams. He fed the gun with his teeth and his elbow after that. Belt over his left forearm, tension made by rolling his whole body away from the gun. 11:40 hours. Snow again. Visibility under 60 meters. He had eaten nothing in 31 hours. Here is the part I am going to tell you flat, without commentary, because it is not mine to soften. At 11:47, a German scout named Bühl, we know the name, we'll get to how, was hit in the pelvis at approximately 200 meters and did not die. He began calling out, not screaming, at first, calling. A word, over and over, that any of us would call. Ledoux could have ended it. 200 meters, 1 traverse click, 3 rounds. He did not. He left the man alive and calling, because a man calling in an open field pulls his comrades forward on their bellies, into the exact band of ground the low gun owned. Twice that afternoon, small groups came for Bühl. Both times they came crawling. Both times they came into the beaten zone. Bühl called for 4 hours and 11 minutes. Ledoux lay 70 meters away and listened to all of it and did not move the gun. That happened. I am not going to explain it away. 13:47 hours. Ammunition remaining. Approximately 800 rounds. Left hand useless. Body temperature dropping. 90 minutes of light left. And this is where he broke. Not dramatically. There was no scream. He simply stopped. Forehead down on the frozen ash runner of a beat sledge, in a drainage cut, in a country he could not pronounce, holding a junction for an army that had put him behind the gun and then written a report that would not include his name. He thought about Danridge saying inside the hour. He thought about a lieutenant and a word. He thought about 4 hours at attention in Oklahoma heat. His right hand went into his breast pocket. The file was cold, worn glassy on one face. Rubber-wrapped tang. His thumb went down at once. Don't press. Let it cut. He did not say anything. He did not decide anything out loud. He put the file back, and he rolled onto his stomach, and he reached left, and he began turning the knurled wheel toward the number written on the back of his hand. 1509 hours. Hauptmann Sattler committed everything he had left. 3rd Platoon reinforced, approximately 40 men, in a broad front advance across the pasture under covering fire from 2 MG-42s in the tree line. Textbook. Overwhelming. The kind of assault that ends positions. They came low. That was the tragedy of it. Sattler's men had learned across 2 days that the American gun took anyone who stood, so they came the way professionals come. Flat, fast, in rushes of 3, 12 inches off the snow. They were doing everything right. They were doing exactly the thing that killed them. First peak. He fired on the fence corner number. No sighting. Snow blowing sideways, visibility under 40 meters, and he could not see one man he was shooting at. He fired a 19-second burst on the mill setting he had written on his hand at 0740 that morning. The cone went out flat and stayed flat, and it swept the snow crust like a hand clearing a table, and 11 men who were doing everything right went down inside 4 seconds without ever knowing where the gun was. The Browning did not climb. The Pintle held. The sledge runner did not walk. It worked. It worked better than he had let himself imagine in a shed in Louisiana. Second peak. 15-22 hours. The barrel went. 13 minutes of near-continuous fire on a heavy barrel in an air-cooled gun. The muzzle end glowing dull orange. The group opening. Rounds starting to keyhole. He had no spare barrel and no asbestos mitt. He changed it anyway. Bare right hand, using his sleeve, head spacing by feel with a dead left arm, 41 seconds, and the skin came off 3 fingers and stayed on the barrel. And while he was doing it, an MG-42 in the tree line found the wall. The burst took the front sledge runner apart. The gun dropped and slewed. His pencil numbers were now meaningless. The whole assembly had shifted, and every registration he had spent his morning building was gone. 20 German soldiers were inside 200 meters and closing. He had 30 seconds and no way to aim. Third peak. 15-24 hours. His right hand went to his pocket. He didn't rush it. There is no version of this where he rushed it. He took the file out, the whole thing, out into the open air, snow landing on the worn face of it, and he held it for a moment in the cracked, bleeding fingers of the hand that had learned it at 9 years old, in a shed that smelled like burnt oil and river water. Don't press. Let it cut. Then he jammed the file under the broken runner as a shim, dropped his shoulder onto the stock, laid the gun by eye down the line of the fence he could just make out through the snow. No mechanism, no mills, no mathematics. Just a man and a machine and everything his father ever taught him about how metal wants to sit. And he fired the last 400 rounds in one continuous belt. 31 seconds. Then the belt ran out and the bolt went forward on nothing, and the sound stopped. And then, nothing. Just wind. Just the tick of hot steel contracting in a Belgian pasture. Just smoke going sideways. Just a man lying flat in a drainage cut with one working hand, breathing. Stop. Look at what just happened. Junction east of Harrisbach. 17 December 1944, 0509 TO 1525 hours before. Enemy force committed. Approximately 62 men. Fusilier Company 18. Volksgrenadier Division. Supporting weapons. 2 times MG-42. 1 times 8 cm mortar section. Friendly forces available to PFC Ledoux. 2 men. Both gone by 0645. 1 machine gun. 1 carbine. Ammunition on hand, 1,750 rounds. 1 machine gun. 30-06, after. Enemy dead, 40 confirmed. Wounded and captured, 6. Ground held, 1 track junction, 100% of the withdrawal route. American personnel who used that route to escape encirclement. 118 estimated. Ammunition expended by protagonist, 1,610 rounds. Time elapsed, 10 hours, 16 minutes. Americans firing that gun, 1 man. Those numbers, sit with that. He walks the field himself, in the last light, which is not something a company commander is supposed to do. He is looking for the gun position, and he cannot find it. He finds the wall. He finds the drainage cut. He kneels in it and puts his eye where the gun must have been and understands, all at once, the entire day, the whole thing, from the first casualty report at dawn. And he stays kneeling for a long moment. Kroll asks how many were in the American position. Sattler looks at the sledge runner, the single set of tracks, the 1 man's worth of brass frozen into red ice. 1, he says. Then, quieter, the sentence he will still be saying in a kitchen in Hanover in 1977, to a son who does not entirely believe him. He fought us from under the ground, and we walked into it standing up. Now, the silence. His own people came back through at 1840 hours. Not a truck. A column on foot, moving west, and Sergeant Cleophas Danridge at the head of it. They found him sitting against the wall with a carbine across his knees and his left sleeve black and stiff, and beyond him 400 meters of pasture that in the dark you could mistake for anything at all, until the light of a shielded torch caught the shapes lying in it. Nobody cheered. Nobody said good work. 20-odd exhausted black artillerymen stood at a farm junction in Belgium and looked at what one of them had done, and the thing on their faces was not pride, and it was not relief. It was something closer to grief. Because every one of them understood, instantly and without discussion, that the army was never going to say his name out loud. Danridge crouched down in front of him. He started to explain about the truck. Ledoux said, "I know why you did it, Cleo. Help me carry the gun." Like and subscribe if you want more stories the record left out. What did it actually achieve? The junction stayed open for 11 critical hours on 17 December 1944. Scattered elements of the 333rd Field Artillery Battalion and attached troops used that route westward, while the Schnee-Eifel pocket closed behind them. The 18th Volksgrenadier Division's reconnaissance screen in that sector was, for practical purposes, destroyed for a day that mattered, because St. Vith was being reinforced hour by hour behind them. And what happened to the man? He was written up, once. The recommendation, filed by an officer of the 333rd, was for the Distinguished Service Cross. It was downgraded to a Bronze Star. The citation that eventually issued described him as having assisted in the defense of a road junction. Assisted. It did not mention the modification. It could not. The modification was still, on paper, a violation. You cannot decorate a man for a weapon he was ordered to dismantle. This is not an anomaly. It is the pattern. Across the entire Second World War, not one black American soldier received the Medal of Honor. Not one. It took until 1997, 52 years, for a review commissioned by the Army to correct 7 of those cases, and 6 of the 7 men were already dead. And there is a harder fact attached to this specific battalion, and it belongs here. On that same day, 17 December 1944, 11 other men of the 333rd Field Artillery Battalion, separated in the same collapse, walking west in the same snow, were captured near the hamlet of Wereth, a few kilometers from this junction. They were taken into a field. They were tortured and shot. The U.S. Army investigated. The file was classified. When the war crimes findings on the Malmedy massacre were published in 1949, the 11 men at Wereth were not in them. There was no memorial to them until 1994, when a Belgian family, the Langers, whose father had sheltered the men that night, built one on their own land with their own money. 50 years. That is how long it took for someone to put up a stone. And it wasn't America who did it. He was in the second rush, the one at 1509, and he was hit in the foot and lay still, and lived because of it. What he described, through an interpreter, was mostly what you would expect. The snow, the sound, the fact that nobody ever saw the gun. Then he described one thing that was not in any American report. After dark, before the American column arrived, a single man came out into the pasture. He was carrying no weapon. He went from body to body in the snow, and at each one he turned the face out of the snow, and at 3 of them he stopped and stayed a moment. Retzlaff said the man walked right past him and looked at him and kept walking. He said the man's left arm did not move at all. There is one more thing in the record, and then I will leave it. The German soldier named Buhl, the one who called out for 4 hours and 11 minutes on the afternoon of 17 December, appears by name in the German casualty return for that company, died of wounds. That is all it says. Amos Leoo never spoke about that afternoon. Not to his family, not to the Veterans Administration, not to the 2 amateur historians who wrote to him in 1988. He answered questions about the gun. He answered questions about the cold. When the letters got to the part about the field, he stopped answering. Make of that what you will. I'm not going to make it for you. He came home in November 1945, Baton Rouge. He opened a small machine repair shop on a lot behind a feed store, and he ran it for 31 years, and he was known across 3 parishes as the man who could fix the thing nobody else could fix. He married Odile Broussard in 1948, 4 children. He never joined a veterans organization. He did not attend a single reunion of the 333rd. He died on 4 March 1991, age 69. And the file? They found it in the toolbox in his shop after he died, in the top tray, with the tang still wrapped in rubber, and one face worn glassy smooth. His daughter took it home. It is not in a museum. It is not in a glass case. It is in a kitchen drawer in a house outside Baton Rouge, and every spring somebody in that family takes it out and uses it to touch up the blade on a lawnmower. They know what it is. That's exactly why they still use it. Share this one with somebody who thinks they know we history. We tell ourselves that being right is enough, that competence rises, that if a man solves the problem nobody else can solve, the world will eventually notice. Amos Leoo is the counter-argument. He was right about the 14 inches. He was right about the flash hider and the frozen belts and the aiming stakes. He was right in a way that saved 118 men who went home and had children and never knew a name. And the army that he was right on behalf of ordered him to stop, called him a word, gave him a medal for assisting, and filed the whole thing under a junction number. He held the ground anyway. That's the part I can't get past. Nobody was coming. Nobody was watching. Nobody was going to write it down. And he did it anyway. There is one thing the record does not explain. In the spring of 1945, when the ground thawed, a Belgian farmer working that pasture pulled up 4 fence pickets that did not belong to him, sharpened, driven deep, set in a line across his field. 3 of them were where you would expect. The 4th was not. The 4th stake was standing 900 meters east of the American position. That is, well past the fence corner. That is, well past the culvert. That is on the far side of the pasture. In ground the Germans had occupied continuously since the evening of 16 December, hours before Amos Leoo ever laid his gun. The Army never recorded a patrol out that far. No American unit reported crossing that line. And a man with 1 machine gun and no left hand had, by every account we have, spent that entire night alone. Nobody has ever explained when he walked out there. Nobody ever asked him either. He died in 1991. He never gave an interview. Maybe it means nothing. Or maybe it means everything. If this story found you, if the name Amos Leoo meant nothing to you an hour ago and now it means something, then leave his name in the comments. Just his name, nothing else. Let's build him a memorial right here, in this comment section, where history forgot to put one. Subscribe, because there are hundreds more of them, forgotten, waiting, and they deserve to be found.